a follow-up video on using cheap supermarket flour that's got less protein in it than other like name brand bread flours, maybe like a gram less or something like that. I just want to use the same amount of water that I use in the bread when I'm using a better quality of flour. I'm also at the same time, because if I'm making one loaf I might as well make two. I'm also going to I'm going to make some wholemeal stroke brown bread and kind of talk about how I feel about those type of flours and what you need to do to them when you're making bread, because they're not, it's not, even though it is flour, it's not like 100% flour like that is. It's got other bits in it, and so you need to kind of compensate for those when you're making the bread. So we'll start off with the starter, and today I will make the starter in a jar, so we can actually see the starter as it grows, and also go and put a rubber glove on the top of it, and then you can see how much kind of carbon dioxide it's creating. So my old starter is almost one. I don't know, they might be older than one now. So we want about that much in. That's a good amount. And then we want 300 grams of flour and 300 grams of water, because we're going to make, well, we're going to want more than that. We're going to want about 350 grams of each. And then we've got plenty of starter to play around with. Oop, oh, scale's on 0. Hopefully it'll all fit in this jar. So I'm going to use all white flour for the to make the starter, and then we'll decide what ratios of brown we're using for the brown loaf, and then etc, etc. Make a massive bag. It's alright, so a few grams. I can make them there, stick it to 3. $50, and then we'll give it a good old stir. Might actually, I think I probably need a lot bigger jar because it might just explode out of this, but we'll find out. So take it up to 700. It'll be fine once I mix it. There we go, up to 700. And we'll get a nice mix. Oh, it's going down, that's fine. Ah, yeah, that'll be fine. It's a big enough jar. Give this a nice mix, and then we'll leave it until it's all nice and bubbly, which might take 24 hours, but there's no rush. You just need to make sure that the starter is all mixed in. That has to be extremely mixed in. That'll do. So we'll leave that for, clean up a little bit. We'll leave it for 24 hours or 12 hours, and we'll see how long that takes. Making a mess of all my fingers, so I've got nothing to turn the phone off with. It's fine, there we go. That's it for the moment. It'll just stay somewhere warm-ish until it starts to really start fermenting and the yeast is really active. The starter is nice and active. You can see all the bubbles there, and I've put an old rubber glove on the top of it, and you can see that it's filled the rubber glove full of air as well. It was flat when I put it on, trust me. It's even squirted into a bit of the glove as well. It's that active. So that's how you can tell if when your starter is ready and active and raring to go. I don't normally use a jar because bit of a swine to clean, so I prefer to put mine in a bowl. But lots of people use jars, but they're just a bit of a pain to wash. Certainly if you're not making that much bread. So that's it. We know that starter is now ready to go, and we'll make some bread with some cheap supermarket flour using more water, and we'll have a look at making brown bread as well. sourdough made with cheap supermarket flour using the normal amount of water that I use when I use super strong or extra strong flour. So 500 grams of strong supermarket flour, 275 grams of water, pinch of salt, 2 or 3 grams, and then, these scales, very active sourdough starter, which we will need 300 grams of. And then we're going to mix it, and then we're going to leave it for an hour, and then we'll knead it. So then we'll see what it looks like when it's kneading. I don't always use a jar for my sourdough starter because it makes a mess of the jar and a lot more difficult to clean than a bowl. So we need 300 grams, teasing it out gently. It's very active as this. We'll see how long it takes to rise. Although it's been going for, this starter's been going for about 2 days now. So, but it's the time of year, it just takes longer. So that's going to be about, nearly. Nearly. 301, that'll be fine. So that back in there. It's just a simple case of giving it a mix around. And then what this does, well, it's just roughly, so it's all combined. So this, what happens is that all the water gets absorbed completely into the flour. Makes it a lot easier to knead. And it means that you can get more liquid into the flour. Same principle applies with making pastry. When you rest the pastry, what you're actually doing as well is you're letting the gluten relax, but you're also making sure that the water fully absorbs into the flour through the resting process, so it's evenly dispersed throughout the pastry as well. And that's something they never taught us in college, but it's something I worked out myself. So, like that. Doesn't have to be completely mixed in, be quite rough. Make sure we get it off our hands as well. Lots of people don't add the starter at this stage. I do, because I think it's a bit of a swine to get the starter mixed in with the. If you just mix the flour and the water and the sugar and the salt together, it's a lot more difficult to then when mix that and then to add the starter afterwards. It just seems, and I don't know why. And there's also moisture there's more moisture in the starter as well, so it just seems a little bit counterproductive. If I'm honest, I'm sure there's a proper reason why they do it that way. But I thought to myself, I'm not going to do it that way, and it worked out fine. So unless someone can actually tell me why you need to do it that certain way of adding your starter after you've mixed all this after the hour, I'm sure they will gladly tell me and tell me when I'm going wrong. But pick all those bits off there. Now we'll cover it with the shower cap, and then we'll leave it for an hour, and then we'll give it a knead. So this is the cheap supermarket flour with the normal amount of water that I add to a sourdough. So we'll see how it goes. And we'll do a quick knead. I think it's going to be a really wet dough. I think it's going to be kind of quite difficult to work with, if I'm honest. So we'll give it a quick knead, and then you don't need to see the whole kneading process. 10 minutes of kneading. I don't think anyone really wants to watch that. I'm sure there's someone who will. So it feels quite wet. Certainly not as. It's certainly a lot wetter than the extra strong flour. So we'll see how it goes. So what tends to happen is it gets a lot firmer and then it gets wetter again. It does sourdough for some strange reason. So we'll see. So anyway, that's starting off. If it changes and gets really difficult to work with, we'll come. I'll start recording again, but it's a bit wet, but we'll see how it goes. So we're about halfway through, and as you can see, it's quite a difficult dough to work with. So it's quite wet, and it wants to stick to the board and it wants to stick to your hands. So you've got to keep it moving, otherwise it starts to collapse. But as you can kind of see, it's not too bad. But I mean, we'll see how it turns out with the what we call it, with the when we actually bake the bread. But it's just not as easy to work with. But you know, if you're on a little bit of a budget, I think you can. I think the cheapest you can get this bread, like cheap bread flour, is about 60p for 1.5 kilos, which is pretty cheap. And the quality of bread that you're making is much nicer than anything you can buy. So if you want to live well for as little money as possible, make your own bread and buy the cheaper stuff from the supermarket. I think this bag's about £1.05, something like that. That's Sainsbury's. So Lidl and Aldi are your cheapest places to buy cheap flour bread. There's a bit of a popular misconception that cash and carries are cheaper than everywhere else, or wholesalers. They're not particularly any cheaper than the supermarkets. It's just they conveniently sell things in large bags. So you can go and buy a much bigger bag of high quality flour in the cash and carry or the wholesalers for a lot less than you can buy the really good quality flours in the supermarket. You see, it's doing that. So it's wanting to stick to the board, but it'll be okay. I think it's a long time since I made bread with cheap bread flour. It was just a choice. It was just that move up a gear with the bread making. So it should be. Oh, there we go. We're up at 10 minutes. So it's not forming a ball like normal bread flour does, and it's still really soft. Softer than I would like it, but it should bake okay. But we'll see. The starter was extra. You see, it doesn't. Once you leave it to relax a little bit on the board, and you stop moving it, it wants to stick to the board and kind of like spread out, and then it's more difficult to maneuver. If you can see, it's done that, and it was only forming a ball because I kept it moving. So whereas the better quality bread flour didn't do that, but you know, we'll see how it goes. So in the bowl, and we'll cover it. The starter was a lot more active. The one that I used today was a lot more active than it normally is. So it might rise. It might rise a little bit quicker than the others. The other videos that I've done on making sourdough, it was like 12 hours in the first prove stroke fermenting. So we'll see how long this takes, but you know, it's about 5 o'clock now, so it'll probably be rising for most of the evening, and then if not overnight as well. So, but you know, it might rise quicker. I'll just keep an eye on it. But that'll be it. So we'll rise it so it's double in size, then we'll knock it back, put it in the proving basket, let it ferment and rise a little bit in the proving basket, and then it'll be in the oven, and we'll use the cast iron pot and see how it turns out. But it's just a kind of experiment to kind of see how much water you can get away with in cheap supermarket flour and what kind of results that you get. So you don't have to do it yourself, you can just use a recipe that I write down. Cheap flour with lots of water in. It's been fermenting and improving for a good 12 hours. If I'm honest, there's plenty of stretch in that. Lots of air. It's been fermenting and rising, so it's doubled in size. It's really nice and soft. It smells nice and yeasty as well. So we'll knock the air out of it, put it in the proving basket for 4 to 6 hours. I tried cooking it at this kind of stage as an experiment in the past, and it didn't work. So it just needs to sit in the proving basket and just to prove a little bit longer and ferment a little bit longer. So knock the air out of it, which is called knocking back. It's still got some large lumps of large air holes in. It's firmed up a little, actually. It's not just as quite soft as it was after I'd kneaded it. That might be down to the temperature. So, proving basket, it's a homemade one. It's just flat cotton with a string tied around it to secure it to a bowl, and it's got a nice dip in it. You can buy proving baskets. I thought they were expensive, certainly a lot more expensive than an old bowl, a bit of string, and a old napkin. So I'm not going to bother forming it into a ball. I'm just going to put it straight into the bowl, and then flour on top. Pat it down a little bit because I don't want it to stick to the shower cap cover. So flour on top so it doesn't stick to anything, and then shower cap on top, and then 4 to 6 hours, and then we'll give it a bake and see how it turns out. But it should, I think it'll be all right actually. I think it'll be all right. I think I've always been put off with the cheaper flour just being a wet dough, and then I moved on to a better quality flour, and it was just easier to work with. So you just got, it's just a case of remembering what it was like when I first started baking bread and using cheap flour. So yeah, it'll probably make a really nice loaf. So we'll kind of see how it goes in a few hours' time. So dough has been proving for 6 to 7 hours. I've just had it out in the fridge for the last couple of hours, just to get to room temperature. As you can see, it's spread out a little bit. There's some air bubbles here and there. It just needs some flour on the top of it, because the top of the loaf here is going to be the bottom of the loaf in the pan. So oven's on, and the cast iron pot is nice and hot, and the oven's on full, and it's on fan as well. So quickly into the pot. We'll get the pot out, put the bread quickly into the pot, and put a nice score on it with a cheap little craft knife, and we'll see how it turns out. So score across the top, because across the side doesn't seem to be working too well. Let's see what happens with that. Lid on, and then quickly back in the oven. "20 minutes on full, and then we'll take it out of the pot and we'll put it back in the oven to crisp up the crust on the outside. We'll see how it turns out. I think it'll be quite a nice loaf actually. And then we'll cool it down, and then we'll cut into it in about an hour after it's ready, something like that. So it's got, otherwise you tend to cut into it when it's straight out of the oven. It wants to collapse, does the bread, so you need time to properly set into the shape. But that's it for the moment. So 20 minutes, and then we'll come and have a look at the loaf again. 20 minutes in the pot in the oven on full blast is up. So take it out. The lid's so I say, because it's hot. Oh, that's good. So nice size, nice bit of split in the top. Move that. Get the pot out of the way. This goes back in the oven. Turn it down to 180, and then it wants to be on for wants to cook for about 25 minutes. Half an hour, something like that, just to, on a lower temperature, just to set the crust. If you carry on cooking it on full whack, it's gonna burn. But that just goes to show that the cheap flour with the full amount of water in works quite well. It's a little bit not as easy to work with as the more expensive flour, but it looks like it's gonna be okay. So we'll cook it, let it go cold, and then we'll have a slice into it and see what it's like. Out the oven, looks pretty good. I think I'm going to work on the folding of the bread and see if I can get a better split in the future. Since the cast iron pot seems to be working pretty well, so I think I'll have a go at rolling the bread and see if that makes a kind of difference to the kind of split that you get. But that's all right from cheap flour and the normal amount of water that I put in. That's all right if you want to play around and you're on a bit of a budget. Nothing wrong with the supermarket flour. There we go. Cool, let's have a look. We'll cut across the which is going to make nicer slices. I'm a little bit plus no, we'll do there. I think it'll get it'll have a nice crumb to this, I think. It's just the cheap supermarket flour is just a little bit more difficult to work with, but that's all you can get. Yeah, that's alright. Yeah, it's just not as It's just not as white as the what we call it, as the better quality flour. I don't know why. It's a little bit grayer in colour, or browner. But yeah, come on, the crumb's all right on that. That's perfectly acceptable for if you wanted to make really nice bread and make it as cheaply as possible. I just want to have to play around. Then supermarket bread with 275 grams of water. Well, mind you, anything from 225 to 250 to 275 all make decent loaves and slightly different to work with, but all very suitable and fair price for the money. So yeah, go for the cheap supermarket flour if you don't want to spend a little bit more on your flour and you just want to have a play around with bread. There you go, easy peasy.